Hi everyone, my name is Joanna. I am a MARA agent and my expertise is to interpret Australian immigration law correctly and apply written and verbal language to influence the decision maker, therefore to make sure my client's permanent visa is approved. So today's lesson, I wanted to talk broadly about my work and why I'm so good at my work. And of course, I will mainly talk about more in GTI, in detail, in something that's really in depth. Okay, you'll not hear anything like that before. Right, so today I want to say why I'm so good on interpreting the law and then get results, right? Got result for clients. First of all, today I will talk about the legal system. Okay, now some of the questions I've received recently, it's some people ask me, hey, what happens here currently US, they actually don't want immigrants, right? And what happened to Australia? Will Australia change? What is the Australian immigration policy, right? Now I want to make sure that you really need to listen to this carefully, that Australia is not influenced in any way in terms of legal system by the US system. There is a difference between the American law and US law as well as English law. So Australia is under English law. So English law, right, all the English law and the US law, we have similarities here. But one of the huge difference is in the US that the president has the executive power. And in Australia, the prime minister doesn't. This is because the US, they have a constitution, right, a written statement, how the country is formed, right, constitution. For Australia and for Commonwealth countries, for Australia, New Zealand, UK, Canada, we do not have a constitution, which means the executive power is not linked with the prime minister who we select them. Right, so that's much difference, meaning someone who's hold a senior position in the government, they cannot make law alone, or they cannot change the law alone. So they have to go through procedures. Now, in UK or Australia, that the executive power is the Queen. The Queen currently is a monarch. We have Elizabeth II. She has the executive power. But since the world, the Queen our monarch hasn't exercised her rights at all. So currently she has two rights she can exercise apart from the normal rights. She owns some of the wings. But two rights, really fundamental right, it's one, she can dismiss the parliament, right? She can form another government. She can say, I don't trust this government, dismiss, all right? The second right, she's the final person to make sure the law is passed or rejected, right? Of course, she never exercised this. She never exercised that. So for Australian law, for the first act, or regulate for the first act, if they have to make a law, of course they debate the first hearing, second hearing, and first reading, second reading, and final reading. Upon receive final reading, then goes to the common House of Lords, then go to the Queen, and she then decides whether she wants to pass a law or not. She never exercised that. So therefore, you can see when Australia passed some law, it takes greater time. It's really because queuing with the Queen. If she can't provide a royal assent, then it's a no law, right? That is no law. Even though it's been debated, passed in Parliament, it's no law until we receive the final step from her. Now, why I'm saying this is really critical, right? People ask me questions, how am I going to get visa grant? Visa grant or visa or immigration law, it's one of the law passed by the Parliament, right? Below that act, we have second legislation, which is regulation, and third one, which is policy. And so it's really important. Who makes the law? Who makes sure? Who is the person to make sure your visa is rejected or approved? So it's really, listen carefully, it's going to be technical here. So we have three levels of law, yeah. One is the primary act. One is primary act, and the second one regulation. A third one is the policy. Okay, so the policy is made by the Department of Home Affairs. That department alone. Okay, they can make policy. They can change. They can change all the times. They can change. They don't need to pass anything. The regulation has to be passed by the Parliament. Regulation is a secondary act, so it has to be by the Parliament. So regulation often, when it changes, it takes time, greater time to change. All right, and they have debate for a while. So whoever you see the GTI, Global Talent Independent Program now, it is a result of 3 parts of work, right? We have primary act, we have regulation, we have policy. And the policy, okay, although regulation already published in November 2019, the policy itself only published in 17th of May this year. Okay, so policy is actually the indication how the processing officer going to make decision on that. That is the key, all right? So policy is the thing that they make sure your visa is approved or rejected. But if, for example, your visa is refused and you go to the tribunal, one of the houses in tribunal, the tribunal does not rely on policy. They can dismiss the whole policy. They don't need to read policy. They say go back to regulation, go back to act, whether this is happening. That is the whole reason when I explain to my clients say about English requirement. Very important, very important. There is no English requirement for the global talent, which is distinguished talent visa. There is no. Why? Because there is no regulation about that, right? There is no regulation. So someone cannot reject your visa because you don't meet English requirement. But they can't grant you the visa if you don't meet English requirement, right? Is that simple? So policy actually give time, right? They give 1 year. If you can't, you either pay for the fee, training fee, or you show you can meet English requirement. So English requirement, recently we have new policy come out what is meant by English requirement. One of the criteria is if you can't sit for English exam or too busy, something like that, you can actually receive a call from department, from case officer, and they can check with you whether you have a functional English. If on the interview they say, hey, I think you're okay, now you don't need to sit English exam. For other requirements, something like in order to meet English requirement, you can have qualification that's completed in English. It can be higher education, primary education, or secondary education, right? So it's very flexible now. But this policy, again, English, it's one of the policy, state in one of the policy, not in a regulation. Therefore, they cannot reject you if you haven't got a English requirement. And of course, you can't approve that as well. Very confused? Now I'm going to explain to you who actually make decisions and how this who actually design your life, right? Who's design your life when you submit application? Who's design your life after you got visa grant into Australia? Who control this? Who has the power? You have 3 types of houses, right? One is the court. Second one is the government. So government is selected party who are running our government. And the third one is the parliament. Okay. So parliament. So here, who makes the law is parliament. How they initially make a law? Someone, MP, which you elected. MP then propose some reading. Okay, I want to make this law. First of all, of course, they will back up by the parties. They will also need to seek advice from other MPs, talk through and lobby others. That will be lobby groups, representation of different industries. Now they have a reading, some kind of discussion. Sometimes they go to debate in parliament. We call it Haza. Okay, So hazard is a debate, content of debate, when before the law it's actually got considered. First time in Parliament. When they got debates, a lot of people approve and they seek approval. Of course, before they went to debate, you have to talk to your colleague first, right? Now, once they have the approval, then go to first reading, second reading, third reading. Then it goes to the first reading, second reading, and third reading. Then in Australia and UK, then they go to the final stage, go to the Queen. Okay, so the Queen decides this law, this act, it's passed a lot. So we are talking about act here. The Queen decides whether the law is passed or not. Once the law is passed, it becomes an act, a primary act. That is the law. Now everybody needs to follow this law. But who's actually say I don't know the meaning of this act, because act can be very, very legal, and who's drafting this act, they are civil servants. Their job is drafting, and they are in the legal industry, I'm sorry. But they are people drafting the act. But drafting acts, human beings, we don't understand, right? If this is happening to everybody, it will happening to foreigners. So how we can actually make this act as understandable for every man, a woman in this country or outside the country. Now the government need to go on to discuss this, and they need to make regulations to interpret this act. Once the regulation is made, then they go to the different department. So for here, our department is Department of Home Affairs. Now, Home Affairs have very, very powerful now, because Home Affairs control the border now as well. Not just control the visa, border security, and immigration, right? 3 parts. This Department of Home Affairs, that's their department to make a policy. Once the many policies made, they start to approve your visa, reject your visa based on the policy. Okay, but of course the policy will be more detailed than regulation, more detailed than act. But primary thing is really about the act and regulation. Now, what happens if someone, for example, got visa rejected based on policy? The case officer will say, I don't think you meet the policy requirement. Now they go appeal to either tribunal, federal court, or federal court, Supreme Court. Then they go to the court. The court can say, excuse me, the immigration, you interpret the policy incorrectly to the regulation. I dismiss your interpretation because I want to rely on the primary act only. At this time, then we overturn the case. Okay, this is how things going on here. For GTI, we don't want to go anything about this drama. We want to meet all these 3 requirements at the same time and got visa approved it. So people ask me questions, hey, Joanne, how can you got visa approved for everybody? I mean, it's impossible.